It took this small community 30 years to find the murderer living amongst them. The way that the killer was finally caught will shock you. On November 24th, 1989, 18-year-old Mandy Stavik went out running with her dog in the small town of Acme, Washington. 3 days later, Mandy's body was found floating in a river wearing only her running shoes. Mandy had been a basketball player, cheerleader, and top student. The young woman had her entire life ahead of her. Mandy's unexpected death devastated the local community. She was found by Detective Ron Peterson.
When you lifted her out of the water as a father, did you say anything to her?
You're the first person that asked that. I said, I got you.
Mandy's body was covered in scratches. Perhaps she had tried to flee or fend off her attacker. Semen was also found inside the young woman's body, pointing to a sexually charged attack.
So when they did the autopsy, they were able to recover male DNA from Mandy.
Despite finding DNA, police were unable to find a match after 30 people in the local area were checked against the sample. Police also investigated Mandy's boyfriend and a few other locals, but everything led to a dead end. For almost 30 years, the 200 people in Acme suspected they were living alongside a murderer.
What was lost for you in this community with the death of Mandy Stavik?
A sense of innocence, I think, more than anything.
It wasn't until 2013 when spontaneous chit-chat about the case changed everything. Heather Backstrom and Marilee Anderson, two mothers who had gone to school with Mandy, were discussing the case at a local water park. During their discussion, Marilee mentioned a name she had been scared to say for almost 30 years.
I really wasn't ready because we are in a small town, and to accuse someone of something that we don't know for sure is a little scary.
The other woman, Heather, had also been suspicious of the same man, but had never felt comfortable enough to say it out loud.
No friend or family in the community that I lived in because of the weight of that.
Both women said the same name almost simultaneously, Tim Bass.
Why did you say Tim Bass?
I thought it was Tim Bass because of the experiences that I had had with him in the past.
Both women had experienced creepy run-ins and exchanged stories. Marilee told Heather that Bass knocked on her door late at night in 1991. He asked if he could use the phone to call his wife. When she handed the phone to him, he began to dial, but something was wrong.
I hear the beep, 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 we're sorry, when you call and the phone's disconnected. So I thought, okay, something's up.
Then things got scary.
So then he walks through the kitchen and back to my bedroom. He said that he used to drive by our house and that he had always been in love with me and wanted to make love to me.
After Bass was asked to leave, he refused. It was only when Marilee threatened to call the police that he eventually left. The two women had no evidence that Bass was involved in the murder, but felt that they had to share their gut feeling with police for the first time. Bass lived in a house 2 miles from Mandy's, right on a running route. Since the murder, he had lived a quiet life working as a delivery driver. He had a wife and 3 kids and had kept himself out of trouble.
He kept to himself and for the most part worked and came home.
Police approached Tim, who claimed he didn't even remember Mandy. Police were immediately suspicious and asked for a saliva sample. Bass refused. Instead, they followed him at work, hoping he'd throw away an item with DNA on it. Without any luck. In a desperate hunt for DNA, police turned to Bass's boss, Kim, who said Bass often called her woman instead of her own name.
Kim said, well, you guys want DNA, don't you? And I said, well, yes. And she says, I can get it for you.
At this point, I'm thinking I'm working with somebody that potentially did this to Mandy, and I gotta know.
After 3 months of waiting, Kim managed to get a hold of a plastic cup he had thrown away.
And I just stood there and went, oh, shit, it's game time. I'm like, this is jackpot. And so this time my heart was like, oh, I was dying because there was a lot of people around. So I grabbed it, and then I was like, I threw it in my desk drawer.
3 months later, the results came back. It was a match.
You hear those words, what was that moment like?
You hear them, but you're not sure it's almost like I'm dreaming. I'm gonna wake up at any moment in time. I was just like, this is the biggest thing that's ever happened to me. A lot of tears.
28 years after the murder, Tim Bass was arrested. Later that day, police visited Mandy's mother.
We've got him. That's all he says, we've got him. And I says, who? I really never dreamed. I really never dreamed it.
The DNA was a match. Tim Bass and Mandy had almost certainly had sex on the night of her death, but convicting Bass of murder was the next challenge.
Were you trying to get me to admit to something I didn't do? Is that what you're trying to do right now?
During the case, Bass's lawyer argued that the two had consensual sex on the night of the murder.
He didn't kidnap anyone, he didn't rape anyone, and he certainly didn't kill anyone. There were no signs of a struggle. Evidence of sexual contact is not evidence of rape.
It seemed that the case might stall with the prosecution lacking proof of sexual assault. That is until his now ex-wife Gina told the court that Bass had tried to get his mother to blame the crime on Bass's father, a man who had died 10 years before.
He asked her, "Can we say Dad did it?" She put her hands over her face and like this and paused for a minute and then said no.
His wife said that Bass had been a controlling and emotionally abusive husband. She had no idea that she was married to a murderer for nearly 30 years.
I felt like his servant. Go get me a drink. Make me food.
I personally witnessed him tell Gina to shut up, 8 million times.
His brother also took the stand describing another damning incident for Bass after he was arrested.
The cops are lying. Everyone's out to get him. He said, "I need a strong alibi."
He asked his family to fabricate one for him. The defense argued that Bass was simply scared that the murder would be wrongly pinned on him.
The defendant's DNA was inside her, and we know that she was kidnapped, she was raped, and then she was killed.
After 30 years of waiting, Mandy's family had just one more day to wait for the verdict, until finally it was read out in court.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy Forrest Bass, guilty of the crime of murder in the first degree as charged in count 1.
Bass was sentenced to 27 years for his crime.
Timothy Forrest Bass, I impose the maximum sentence of 320 months in the custody of the Washington State Department of Corrections.
Despite still pleading his innocence, it is likely that Bass will spend the rest of his life behind bars. After decades of waiting, Mandy Stavik's family and the rest of the community finally felt as though justice had been done. If it wasn't for the casual chit-chat between two women at a water park, it's likely that the case would have never been solved. Thanks for watching this episode of Crime 101. Be sure to subscribe so that you don't miss the next exciting episode.